Hello and welcome to the Arts in Conversation. I'm Ben Hartley, Executive Director of the National Arts Club, located here in New York City. For those who are not familiar with the club, we're a 501c3 non-profit with a mission to stimulate, foster and promote public interest in the arts. Annually, the club offers more than 150 free programs to the public, including exhibitions, theatrical and musical performances, lectures and readings. At the National Arts Club, we celebrate all art forms, so for this podcast series, each episode dives deeper into one specific medium. Today, our episode is dedicated to photography. The club regularly hosts exhibitions of photography and invites photographers and experts to discuss the medium with our audiences. We also have a number of photographic works in our permanent collection. Photography, unlike many art forms, has changed radically over the last 50 years. From a personal experience, I think back to the days where my father would take a photo of us kids. With the light meter, we'd have our frozen smiles as he tried to capture casual moments. To today, where everyone can literally be a photographer. The medium has changed. What has not changed, I've found, is my ability to take a good photo. Today, we're going to explore photography, what makes for a good photograph, what people are collecting, and what people are thinking in the world of photography. We're going to start off today's episode by talking to photographer Charles Johnstone, who recently had his second exhibition here at the National Arts Club. Charles is a self-taught photographer whose work features his immediate surroundings and environments encountered during travel. His recent exhibition, titled An Endless Summer, featured a tightly edited collection of Polaroids from 5 projects he shot in California, New York, and Florida, and offered thematic, stylistic connections between them. Welcome, Charles.
My name is Charles Johnstone. I'm a born and bred New Yorker. And this is my second show of Polaroids at the National Arts Club. The first one was 34 Polaroids, and this one is called An Endless Summer. And for your younger listeners, that was a famous surfing movie back in the day. The most recent show, An Endless Summer, was a Polaroid shot on expired film, really from about 3 or 4 categories, shot in my summer house in upstate New York at my summer house swimming pool, which I also made a book for. California, I live out in LA during the winter months, a couple of months, and also in Florida, where I have a lot of friends who put me up, including family. I actually got a very late start in photography. When I was in my 20s, I was playing a lot of tennis around the world, traveling, and I always had a camera with me, so that was really my first love, was just taking photos when I wasn't on the court playing. I started off doing very topographical work. I did 5 books on New York City. Probably the most known is called 34 Basketball Courts, which was sort of an homage to the great photographer Ed Ruscha, who did a small artist book in the 60s called 34 Parking Lots. I've done a lot of medium format film. I did try large format once. It's sort of a funny story, and I took a large format camera to Havana because my very first book I ever shot was Havana 2006. I had a large format camera and a tripod and was arrested in the streets of Havana because they thought I was a professional. I was shooting gas stations for the Portfolio 26 Havana gas stations, and one was this very old, beautiful gas station, and it had a rope around it, and it looked like it was from like the 1920s, and everything in Havana has sort of that Art Deco look to it. So I was, just setting up to shoot and shot, and all of a sudden there's 2 police cars, and this is a military installation, the officer said to me in Spanish, which I don't speak, but luckily I had a translator with me, and you are not allowed to shoot this. In fact, you're going to have to come to the station with me right now. So meanwhile, I'm panicking, and my translator said, don't worry, this happens all the time. We can get around it. Luckily, I got a few shots of that station ahead of time. So I said, you know what, I'm going to tone it down. And so I shot for a long time and I still do, with a medium format film camera in square format, which is 6x6. I can say who's been sort of an inspiration to me, and they're different photographers. First of all, Ed Ruscha. I was fortunate enough to be in an exhibition with him at Gagosian Gallery. Helmut Newton's also an inspiration. It's sort of totally different from his Polaroid work, because I've done a couple of books. One was called The Girl on the Fifth Floor Walk-Up, and another one was with a Parisian model, and it was called Je ne sais quoi. And the first book of Polaroids was a book called Libby. I've made 16 photo books. One that really stands out is called MacArthur Park. A lot of my work is very personal, and this was on an old girlfriend, Jeannie, who I dated for 3 or 4 years. A lot of people say I should have married, but I didn't. And MacArthur Park was our favorite song. I found all these old photographs of her. I found all old photographs of MacArthur Park on postcards. So the book is a scrapbook. It's all about memory, love, love that didn't quite last. One of the problems that a lot of people, I think, have is trying to get the clearest, sharpest photograph out there, and that really comes from the digital age. I shoot, as I said, expired Polaroid film, which is the total opposite of that. And I think people are just so obsessed with getting, that perfect, sharpest photo that they lose sight of really what it is just to take a beautiful photograph. To me, I've always worked in sequencing a book. A lot of people can take one great photo. As a bookmaker, it's a lot harder to get 25, 30, or 40 images to put together. Go to a bookstore, whether it's the MoMA bookstore. Dashwood Books is a wonderful photography bookstore here in New York. Look at hundreds and hundreds of books, whatever you can get your hands on, and just get a feeling for what photographers have done in the past. You don't have to follow them. You can blaze your own path. But that's a good start. Also go to museum shows and gallery shows showing, photography also. International Center of Photography is a great place to start here in New York City. But MoMA and the Met also have great shows, as does the Whitney. I travel a lot internationally, so France, Paris, especially Paris Photo is one of the great photo fairs in the world, probably the first most important photo fair. I've been fortunate enough to be in that 6 or 7 times with galleries. I have 3 galleries that represent me in LA, New York, and Berlin.
Thanks so much to Charles. I've always been a person who loved photographs of people. When you think of George Platt Lyons, Annie Leibovitz, Dorothea Lange, the family photos we all take, the National Geographic. Those are what I think are the great photos, the people who are close to us, the faces we see, the light, the expressions, the joy, the happiness that comes through photography of the face, of people in action. For our next segment, we look at the legacy of photographer Gordon Parks, one of the most groundbreaking figures of the 20th century. Particularly known for his candid depictions of black life in America from the 1940s to the early 2000s, Parks was the first African-American staff photographer for Life magazine. He was honored by our club in 1997 and received countless other accolades during his lifetime. Joining us to discuss Parks' life and work is director and producer John Maggio, who worked with the Gordon Parks Foundation to create the HBO documentary A Choice of Weapons, inspired by Gordon Parks. The Gordon Parks Foundation permanently preserves the work of Gordon Parks, makes it available to the public through exhibitions, books, and electronic media, and supports artistic and educational activities that advance what Parks described as the common search for a better life and a better world. Welcome, John.
My name is John Maggio. I'm a producer and director of documentary films. I've made a number of films over the years for HBO, which include A Choice of Weapons, inspired by Gordon Parks. I make all sorts of films, political films, biographies. What I look for in a film is a great story. Narrative storytelling is, I think, critical, as you guys know. We're here doing a podcast, so I love to tell stories. I was approached I'd say about 3 years ago, by the Gordon Parks Foundation to see if I was interested in making a film about Gordon. There had been a biography on HBO, actually, about 10 or 12 years ago. I wanted to do something different. I took my cues from his autobiography, A Choice of Weapons. Gordon had written a number of autobiographies throughout his life. But A Choice of Weapons really got at the part of Gordon's story I wanted to tell, which is that using art as a weapon for change. That was really important to Gordon. Gordon Parks, as the great advocate and lawyer Brian Stevenson said, was a man who lived the quintessential Black life in America. His life began in the early teens, one of 15 children growing up in Fort Scott, Kansas, the son of former slaves, who lived, as Stevenson said, this quintessential Black life of neglect, of disenfranchisement, of abuse, of segregation. He had to flee Fort Scott for his life. He went up to Minnesota, where life was no better for him in the urban north. But one of the things he discovered early on was the camera. So when he got that camera in his hands, it absolutely changed his life. He saw that it was an object through which he could tell his story. He realized quickly that he just had an eye for photography. But his first foray into the professional art world, he started off doing portraits in Chicago. What we realized early on about Gordon was that he brought humanity through his lens. It's not an easy thing to do. But he started to show different shades of Black life that most of America hadn't seen. These photographs were showing up in Black newspapers, however. But when you look back at his work, you see that he was trying to portray something more positive about a more three-dimensional aspect of Black life. He then put together a portfolio of photos. He got a fellowship in D.C. Gordon got to intern with a man named Roy Stryker, who ran the Farm Security Administration. And Roy taught him a lot about how to use your camera as a weapon, how to go out and document the world around you without prejudice, but just to frame it in a way that told a story, an important story. He put together a portfolio of pictures that he took with FSA, went up to New York, and brought that portfolio into Life magazine in 1948, and was not going to leave without an assignment. Made up an assignment, actually. He said, he told the editors at Life that he could get inside the life of a Harlem gang leader. Not having met a Harlem gang leader or anything. So this says a lot about who Gordon was as a person, as an artist. He was the ultimate, and I mean this in the most positive way, hustler. He just didn't have a safety net and just hustled, Anyways, he went into Harlem, spent months there, poked around, found a guy named Red Jackson, who turned out to be a Harlem gang leader. And as he had done from the beginning, he started to document this other side of gang life, not just the violent part, but who was Red as a human being, who was Red at home with his mom, who was Red's younger brother, who were his cousins, what was his life like? And as the great Nelson George says in the film I made, says, no one's a gang leader 24 hours a day. And we see that. We see that portrait of Red's life. Now we see the other side. One of Red's gang leaders died. He documented that. But we see emerge in this very first series of photographs he did for Life magazine, everything about Gordon's technique. He embeds, he creates this intimacy, he gains people's trust. It's not easy. The camera is in so many ways a confessional. It's almost like truth serum. People have a hard time lying to camera. When they do, they're really practiced liars, but it usually captures something authentic, and Gordon understood that. So he brought the photos back. Life loved it. And not only did Life love it, but America loved it. Life magazine at the time was its Instagram of today. It reached 22 million people. People read Life magazine to understand the world around them. And Gordon suddenly had this unbelievable stage upon which to practice his art. And he did it miraculously for over a decade at Life and covered some of the most amazing, interesting, and important stories. As much as he's considered a sort of photojournalist, he was an artist. He had an absolute eye for composition. And that's the thing about, I was never able to wanted to be, but was never very successful at still photography, because it takes an enormous amount of patience. Patience is sort of hurry up and wait, right? It's like, all right, I want to document this scene here, but I want to have just the right moment. So I'm going to sit still and I'm going to watch. And I'm going to get people to trust me, so they act natural and they just go about their life, and then boom, and then I catch it. And he had this unbelievable ability to do that at almost every turn. There's a great photo that I absolutely love, and it's in color. Some of his color work I really loved, because I always feel the black and white, weirdly for me, is a level of abstraction that is beautiful and artful. But even in color, he brought he brought a nuance and an expression that I was really surprised by. He did a series in the Jim Crow South. This is before the Civil Rights Movement in the 50s. It's of him in the Atlanta bus terminal. And there's a black maid holding a white baby while the white mother in a hat is sitting there looking sort of flummoxed. But it says everything you want to know about the South at that moment and the world that black people inhabited there and the work they were allowed to do and who they did it for. But it would have been impossible for a black man like Gordon to have openly taken that photograph and actually composed it in a way as powerfully as he did. And what you see is that clearly he's taking a camera around his shoulder backwards and taking the photograph because you see a part of his face obscures the front part of the frame. It is so incredibly, I'm getting goosebumps just as I tell you about it because it captures a moment in time that has passed, but that's the thing about Gordon's work. Sadly, it's cyclical. We're still dealing with a lot of these same issues. So again, it's composition when it comes to photography like that. And you can bring a level of art to it in a panicked situation like that. That's something that I don't know that you can ever teach. So I would say that's his greatest gift was just this unbelievable patience and this ability to compose under pressure. It's just remarkable. The Gordon Parks Foundation is truly one of the great foundations going today because I find museums often, I'm not drawn to museums. I find art on walls often just feels dead to me in some way. I may not be popular to say. But what the foundation does so well, I think, in honoring Gordon's legacy is it's in constant movement. They put out these gorgeous books of Gordon's work, of which, they have an embarrassment of riches to work with. They have dedicated themselves to re-inspiring people around Gordon Parks, not just by putting on exhibits at a gallery. Part of their mission was for me to reimagine Gordon for today. And I think, what other foundations do that kind of work? It's one of those things where when you see Gordon's work, you think, well, yeah, who wouldn't think he's relevant? But what they've done is to be able to kind of really bring it into the present. And every year there seems to be a new book of his work that they're not just picture books, but they, again, like Gordon, they tell a story. They gather together some of the great artists working today to write the forwards and to write about the photography. Because the work Jelani Cobb says in the film about Gordon Parks is what he covered is sadly still going on, still with us today, And so I think it's ever more important. So the foundation itself is imbued with that mission that I think makes it really special.
Thanks so much, John. For every photo that we see, there are many, many that we don't see that end up in a drawer, in our cameras, that end up in our phones. These are the shadows of our memories. Where do they go? They're captured fleetingly and then lost. What happens with that photograph of that birthday party, that holiday event, that musical performance your child did? Where do those go? We finished this episode with someone who collects photography that has often been forgotten about by the rest of the world. For this special National Arts Club member profile, we're taking you on a trip. We traveled uptown to visit the Burns Archive, located in a historic townhouse in Midtown Manhattan. The Burns Archive possesses more than 1 million historic photographs. Today, the amazing team at the Burns Archive is showing us around their impressive collection. As you walk through this spectacular townhouse, every wall in every room is covered from floor to ceiling with photographs of unseen and sometimes disquieting aspects of history and culture.
Each one of these pictures has their own story. That's why they're hanging here.
So this is the crime section. If you look up over here, you can see the St. Valentine's Day Massacre in the top corner, Bonnie and Clyde. We have what we call the most entertaining photograph in the archive. It is a mugshot of a flasher and his outfit.
These photos depict everything from public executions to medical anomalies to unique and shocking scenes in World War II. Dr. Stanley B Burns, a member of our club since the 1980s, founded the Burns Archive in 1977 with the purpose of sharing his discoveries with the world. Since then, Dr. Burns has authored dozens of award-winning photo history books exhibiting his world-famous collection. Let's sit down with Dr. Burns now.
I'm Dr. Stanley B Burns. I am a physician, actually an eye surgeon, ophthalmologist, a historian, a photography collector, founder of the Burns Archive, and a member of the National Arts Club for 36 years. As a photographer, I became interested in photography when I went to medical school. and I was a documentarian of my classes for years. I was always a historian, and I became interested in photography when it became available in the 1970s, and I recognized photography as the ultimate document. I began collecting photography in 1975. I originally started collecting daguerreotypes and ambrotypes, also snapshots and photographs taken personally by people. Daguerreotype is the first form of photography. They are very clear, almost three-dimensional pictures taken on a silver plate. They were popular mainly in America between 1840 and 1860, and they were very fragile. They had to be cased or framed. The ambrotype was the second type of photograph, which was a photograph on glass. Because I collected unique photographs, and because I was a historian interested in writing and collecting about unappreciated and unexplored areas of history and photography, the collection grew and people found interest in it. I do not have, and I never emphasize in my collection, photographs taken by the noted photographers. If you want to see those photographs, you can go to any museum or any collector with a lot of money, and you already have those pictures in your head. You don't have to see them again. The pictures you want to see are the ones you've never seen before, and those are the ones I collected. I live in a 19-room townhouse, and almost all of the rooms are filled. My patient's waiting room, besides being a waiting room, I have every form of early photography from 1840 to 1950, as well as several unique episodes of the history of the U.S. Nicaragua Canal Commission, the first Mexican-American meeting, and other unusual portraits taken for special occasions that were tossed away. The one thing about history is that as soon as you don't like a picture of yourself or what's been done, the image usually gets tossed. Those are the images I looked for because those unique episodes became important historical facts. My favorite image is the one of the United States Nicaragua Canal Commission. It is a picture of all the engineers that worked on that. It's a large formal photograph signed by every one of the engineers. It hung in an office in Washington, D.C., and then discarded. Each and every one of my books is an area that is unappreciated in photography or in history. I'll give an example of some of my topics. My crime book, Deadly Intent, shows all of the aspects of crime and punishment. In the book are the only pictures of the inside of a prison which had no cell doors. And it was a very famous prison on Cuba. I have the only surviving photograph of that. And I have the only surviving photographs in that book of water torture in the United States. So it has all the forms of executions, all the forms of police action, of crime. It's different from other books on crime photography because it has the complete forensic viewpoint, not just one photograph of a crime scene, but 15 photographs of a crime scene. My latest book, African American in Their Cars, has 460 photographs of African Americans posing with their cars, which is a standard American tradition. Everyone's proud of their cars. And this was a part of American culture. All these people in their cars are extraordinarily happy. You see the pride and joy of car ownership. I find the photos all over the world. After you've been collecting for almost 50 years, you get to be known. Of course, eBay's been a great source recently, but before that, there were photographic shows every weekend. London still has early photography shows 3 times a year, and these are historic vintage photography shows. I'm not talking about contemporary photography. I'm looking for unique topics so that I collect by topic and historical importance. And that's what I write on. I wrote a book, another one of my books, called Messer and Schmiss. It's about the tradition in Germanic countries of having a duel so that you could have a scar on your face. And this was a symbol of elite universities in Frankfurt, in Berlin, in Nuremberg, etc. And the interesting part about it, there are still dueling clubs today in those countries, except that no photographs are allowed. And it's the only book showing this tradition that's ever been written. photography is an art form, it's just a way of expressing how you feel about the world. It's like the elephant, you know. You have 100 people take a picture of an elephant, you'll get 100 different views. And so over the century and a half so that photography's been around, people have viewpoints, artistic viewpoints about the way the world looks.
Thanks so much to Dr. Burns, and thank you for tuning into this episode of The Arts in Conversation. Future episodes will be released on the 15th of each month, so be sure to subscribe and listen next month for our episode all about fashion. The Arts in Conversation is produced by Emily Charish from Charish Sound. Charish Sound produces branded podcasts for businesses. The Arts in Conversation is also produced by Mitch Case from the National Arts Club. We look forward to having you with us again next month.